I came home, and everything I owned was dumped on the lawn. My clothes, my books, the photo albums my mother left me. Just thrown out like trash. My father stood on the porch and said, "You're not welcome here anymore." No warning. No explanation. Just a gone. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just picked up my things, piece by piece, in silence. Because what he didn't know was that I had found something. An old email. A lawyer's name. And a truth he had buried for 2 years. 10 days later, my phone had 88 messages from him. Missed calls. Voicemails. Begging. And by then, it was already too late for him to fix what he'd done. My name is Naomi. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. I pulled into the driveway and felt my stomach drop before I even turned off the engine. My clothes were spread across the front lawn. My books. The photo albums my mother left me. All of it just scattered on the wet grass like someone had ripped open my life and shaken it out. My father stood on the porch with his arms crossed. Diane, my stepmother, stood just behind him, one hand resting on the doorframe, a small smile on her face like she was watching something she'd planned for a long time. "You're done here," my father said. No hello. No warning. No reason. Just those 3 words, flat and final, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed in private. Then he kicked my suitcase down the porch steps. It bounced twice and landed sideways in the mud. I hadn't even gotten out of the car yet. I stepped out slowly, the way you move when your brain hasn't fully caught up to what your eyes are seeing. Neighbors were already slowing down. A woman walking her dog stopped completely. Across the street, a teenager had his phone out. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But something inside me locked up tight, like a door slamming shut on everything soft and vulnerable. "Don't make a scene," my father said. I almost laughed. He had dumped my entire life on the lawn for the neighborhood to see, and he was warning me about scenes. Diane watched from the porch, arms folded now, looking satisfied. I started picking things up, one item at a time, quietly, because that was the only power I had left in that moment, the power to not give them what they wanted. Then my father said something that made my hands go still. "You were never supposed to come back here in the first place." I straightened up and looked at him. He had asked me to move in. 8 months ago, after my divorce was finalized and I had nowhere stable to land, he called me himself. Said he had the room. Said family was family. I reminded him of that now, standing on his lawn with my wet clothes in my arms. He shrugged. Literally shrugged. The way you do when someone mentions something that no longer matters to you. "That was before I realized you'd never get back on your feet," he said. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, calm, almost bored, like I was a problem he was finally getting around to solving. Diane stepped back inside. She had seen enough. I bent down and picked up the last box. Then my father added, quiet but clear, "And don't bother asking for your share of anything." My hands tightened around the box. Share. That word landed differently than anything else he had said. I drove 3 blocks and pulled over. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from something I couldn't name yet, something between rage and recognition, like a memory trying to push its way through a locked door. Don't bother asking for your share. Why would he say that? I hadn't mentioned anything about money. I hadn't even thought about it. I was too busy trying to figure out where I was going to sleep that night. But he brought it up on his own. That wasn't a warning. That was a tell. I reached into my bag and dug around until I found my phone. I scrolled back through my emails, months and months of them, until I found the one I had almost deleted a year ago. It was from a lawyer. My late mother's lawyer. I had never fully read it. I opened it now. The email was 2 years old. I had skimmed it once after my mother passed and filed it away mentally as something to deal with later. Later never came. Then came my marriage falling apart, the move, the chaos of just trying to survive. But sitting in my car outside a stranger's hedges with everything I owned in the back seat, I read every word this time. The lawyer's name was Mr. Adeyemi. His message was polite but specific. He wanted to discuss the terms of a trust my mother had established before her death. A trust. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary. I read that sentence 3 times. My father had told me twice that my mother left nothing. Medical bills wiped it out, he said both times, eyes steady, voice calm. But there it was in plain black text. A trust, my name, and a lawyer waiting for my call. My father had been the trustee. I slept in my car that night. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour grocery store, cracked the window, and pulled a jacket over my shoulders. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't warm enough. A security guard knocked on my window at 2 in the morning, and I had to explain myself. It was humiliating in a way that sitting still and polite can sometimes be even worse than shouting. But something had changed inside me since I read that email. The humiliation was still there. The anger was still there. But underneath both of those things, something quieter had taken root, something focused and cold and very, very patient. I wasn't going to call my father and beg. I wasn't going to show up at his door and yell. I was going to find out the truth first. All of it. Every number. Every date. Every signature. And then I would decide what to do with what I found. Mr. Adeyemi's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, tucked between an insurance agency and a dentist's office. Nothing fancy. A rubber plant by the window. Certificates on the wall. He was older than I expected. White-haired, careful in his movements, the kind of man who chose each word deliberately. When his assistant showed me in and I said my mother's name, his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a face does when it hears something that carries weight. I told him I had found his email, that I had never followed up, that my father had told me there was no estate to speak of. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, quietly but clearly, "Your father never told you about the trust?" My chest tightened. "No," I said. He told me there was nothing. Mr. Adeyemi set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. "Then we have a great deal to discuss." My mother had been careful. Mr. Adeyemi explained it slowly, in the way that people explain important things to someone who is clearly in shock. She had set up the trust 3 years before she died, during a period when her health first started declining, and she was still sharp enough to plan ahead. The trust was structured to release funds to me in stages, part when I turned 30, part upon any major life event like a divorce or job loss, and the remainder at 35. I was 31, recently divorced, recently unemployed. By every measure my mother had written into that document, I should have received money months ago. I asked Mr. Adeyemi the question I already half knew the answer to. Why didn't that happen? He pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk between us. Because as acting trustee, he said, your father had full authority to manage and distribute the funds. He paused. And he chose not to notify you. I stared at the folder. Has the trust been accessed? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Mr. Adeyemi didn't answer immediately. He had the look of a man who had delivered difficult news before, someone who understood that the few seconds before an answer could sometimes prepare a person better than the answer itself. Then he said it. Yes. Extensively. The word landed like something physical. Extensively. Not once. Not a small amount. Not a mistake. Extensively. I sat with that for a moment. The rubber plant by the window caught the light. Outside, traffic moved normally, indifferently, the way the world always does when something inside you is breaking. I need to see the records, I said. I thought you might, Mr. Adeyemi replied. He turned the folder to face me and opened it. I looked down at the first page. The numbers were worse than anything I had imagined. I didn't cry in his office. I didn't raise my voice. I sat there and I read. Withdrawal after withdrawal, each one dated and documented, going back almost 2 years. The amounts were not small. Some were transfers. Some were direct payments. Each one had my father's signature as trustee. Mr. Adeyemi gave me time. He refilled my water glass without being asked. He didn't rush me. When I finally looked up, I asked him the practical question, the only one that mattered now. Is there anything left? Some, he said. Enough that a case is worth pursuing. But the majority has been moved. Moved where? He slid a second sheet across the desk. payment records, contractor invoices, a receipt for a car, travel bookings. I recognized the name of the contractor. He had redone the kitchen in my father's house last spring. I had seen the new countertops myself. I had complimented them. My mother's money had paid for those countertops. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. The withdrawals mapped almost perfectly onto my stepmother Diane's life over the past 2 years. The car was hers. I had watched her drive it to a family dinner last Christmas. The travel bookings matched a trip they had taken to Portugal that my father told me was a work thing. My mother had saved that money quietly, carefully, over years of her life. She had gone without things so that I would have something. She had thought about my future when her own was uncertain. And my father had spent it on kitchen countertops and a European vacation. I gathered the documents Mr. Adeyemi had printed for me, folded them carefully, and put them in my bag. "What are my options?" I asked. He walked me through them plainly. A formal legal claim for breach of fiduciary duty. A petition to have my father removed as trustee. A full accounting of all funds dispersed. It would take patience, he said. And precision. I have both, I told him. I spent the next 3 days in the library. Not because I couldn't afford a hotel room anymore. A coworker had offered me her couch. But because the library was quiet and had long tables and I needed space to spread everything out and think. I made a timeline. Every withdrawal, every date, every amount. I cross-referenced what I could find publicly. I wrote down every question I still needed answered. Mr. Adeyemi had referred me to a colleague of his, a younger attorney named Ms. Okafor who handled estate litigation. She was direct and fast-talking, and she didn't waste either of our time. When I laid out the documents for her, she went quiet for a moment in the same way Mr. Adeyemi had. Then she said, "This is a strong case." "How strong?" I asked. "Strong enough that I'm surprised he wasn't more careful," she said. She looked up at me. "Did he know you had this email from Mr. Adeyemi?" "No," I said. "I don't think so." "Then that's why he wasn't careful," she said. "He didn't think you'd ever look." I went quiet. Not publicly quiet. I still went to work, still texted people back, still showed up where I was supposed to show up. But where my father was concerned, I disappeared completely. No calls. No messages. No confrontation. I let him believe I had crawled away. That the lawn, the kicked suitcase, the words on the porch had finished me. That I was somewhere licking my wounds and too ashamed to push back. This was not difficult to pull off. He had always underestimated me. He had been doing it for years without realizing it. I had just never given him a reason to stop. Meanwhile, Ms. Okafor and I were building. Document by document, statement by statement, the picture grew sharper and more complete. Each time I wanted to pick up the phone and confront him, I thought about my mother. About how carefully she had planned. How quietly she had worked. I could be quiet too. Bank records take time to subpoena. But Mr. Adeyemi had kept meticulous files. Every correspondence related to the trust, every instruction my father had given as trustee, every disbursement request. All of it was on paper, signed, dated, archived. My father had apparently trusted that these files would stay buried. That I would never go looking. That the combination of grief and chaos after my mother's death, followed by my divorce, followed by moving in with him, had kept me distracted enough that I would simply never ask the right questions. He had been right for 2 years. He was not right anymore. Ms. Okafor presented the compiled evidence to me on a Thursday afternoon. 41 pages. A clear record of mismanagement. A clear record of self-dealing. "There's one more thing," she said, turning to the last section. She pointed to a transfer dated just 9 days before he threw my belongings onto the lawn. A large one. Recent. Very recent. He hadn't stopped. Even as I was living under his roof, he was still taking from the trust. That recent transfer changed everything. It wasn't just proof of what he had done in the past. It was proof of what he was still doing, actively, deliberately, while I was asleep in his guest room down the hall. It meant he had kicked me out not because he was tired of me, not because he was frustrated, but because I had become a risk. Maybe he worried I was getting curious. Maybe he just wanted me gone before I stumbled onto something. He had thrown my life onto the lawn to protect himself. Ms. Okafor didn't need to explain why this mattered legally. I already understood. It shows ongoing intent, I said. Exactly, she replied. She had already drafted the motion. It was clean. No emotional language. Just dates, amounts, documentation, and the specific legal statutes my father had violated as trustee. Are you ready? She asked. I thought about my mother. About those photo albums scattered on wet grass. Yes, I said. The legal motion was filed on a Tuesday morning. Ms. Okafor handled it with exactly the precision she had promised. No leaks, no drama, no announcement. Just the paperwork moving through the proper channels, each step documented, each form filed correctly, each deadline met. My father was formally served 2 days later. I know this because Ms. Okafor called me that afternoon and told me, in the same calm voice she used for everything, that the process server had made contact and that my father had signed to acknowledge receipt. I sat with that for a while after we hung up. He now knew. He knew that I had found the trust. That I had found Mr. Adeyemi. That I had the bank records. That I had 41 pages of documented evidence and a lawyer who knew exactly what to do with them. He knew that I hadn't run away when he kicked me out. I had gone to work. The silence after he was served lasted 4 days. 4 days of nothing. No call. No message. No word through any relative or mutual contact. I almost started to wonder if he would simply fight it, hire his own attorney, deny everything, drag it out for as long as possible. Ms. Okafor told me that was possible. She said to be patient. She said the silence was normal. But I knew my father. I knew that his confidence came from believing he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. That certainty had always been the foundation of everything he did. His authority in the family. His dismissal of my mother's concerns when she was alive. His ease in making decisions that affected other people. That certainty was now in contact with 41 pages of evidence. I didn't expect the silence to last. On the evening of the 4th day, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I set the phone face down on the table and let it ring. The voicemail was 40 seconds long. I listened to it once, standing in the kitchen of my coworker's apartment with the tap still running. His voice was different. Not weak, not broken, but the certainty was gone. There was something careful in it now. Measured. The voice of someone who had been confident their whole life and was suddenly, for the first time, unsure of the ground beneath them. It's me. Call me back. We need to talk. That was all. No apology. No explanation. Just a summons, still phrased like a summons, out of old habit. I saved the voicemail, forwarded it to Ms. Okafor as she had instructed me to do with any contact, and went back to making dinner. Within the hour, another message came through. Then another. By the end of the night, there were 7 missed calls. I went to sleep without responding to any of them. By day 3 after the voicemail, the messages had changed tone entirely. The first wave had been demands dressed up as requests. Asterisk, call me. We need to talk. This is serious. Asterisk, his usual register firm, expecting compliance, assuming I would fall back into the old pattern of picking up when he called. Then something shifted. The 3rd day brought shorter messages. Fragmented. The kind of messages that come from someone typing with shaking hands. I can explain this. You don't understand the full picture. There are things your mother wanted that you don't know about. That last one almost worked. For about 10 minutes, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine in an apartment that wasn't mine, I felt the old pull. The part of me that had spent my whole life wanting a version of my father that was worth trusting. Then I remembered the lawn. The wet grass. The photo albums face down in the mud. I put the phone away and called Ms. Okafor instead. By day 5, the apologies started arriving. Not clean ones. Not the kind that take responsibility and ask for nothing. These were the desperate kind. The ones that circle around guilt without ever landing on it. The ones that are really just fear wearing an apology's clothing. I'm sorry things got out of hand. I never meant for it to go this far. You're overreacting to something you don't fully understand yet. That last message told me everything about where he actually was. Still convinced, on some level, that I was the problem. That if I just calmed down and listened, I would see his side and walk away from the case. He had not yet accepted that there was no version of this where I walked away. Diane, I noticed, had gone completely silent. No messages from her at all. Not a single word since she had stood on that porch watching me gather my things. That told me something too. On day 7, one message stood out from all the others. It came at 11:14 at night. Short. No greeting. I was going to fix it. That was all. 6 words. But those 6 words were the most honest thing he had said to me in years, possibly ever, and we both knew it. Because I was going to fix it meant he knew there was something broken. It meant he had always known. It meant that every time he looked me in the eye and said my mother had left nothing, every time he let me struggle while her money sat in accounts he controlled, he had told himself it was temporary. That he would put it back eventually. That it didn't really count if he intended to correct it one day. He had carried that story about himself for 2 years. Ms. Okafor told me to screenshot it and send it to her immediately. That's an admission, she said. I already knew. On the 10th day, I picked up my phone and counted. 88 messages. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, 2 emails. From my father. From a number I didn't recognize that I suspected was Diane. One from my uncle on my father's side who had never once called me in my adult life. 88. 10 days ago I had been on my knees in the mud, picking up my mother's photo albums while a neighbor filmed me from across the street. Now the man who had stood on that porch with his arms crossed, the man who had kicked my suitcase down the steps and told me I was never supposed to come back, had sent me 88 messages. I read through the most recent ones. They had moved past apology now. Past explanation. Past blame. They had arrived at something new. Panic. And in the very last message, a single line that made me sit down slowly and read it twice. Asterisk, please. We'll lose everything, asterisk. Wait. He had gone from you were never supposed to come back to we'll lose everything in 10 days. Wait, as if we were still a unit. As if there was a family here that I was threatening. As if throwing my possessions onto the lawn had not already made very clear what he thought of our connection. I sat with that word for a long time. Then I typed back. Just 2 words. I know. It was the first message I had sent him since the lawn. The first contact in 10 days. His reply came in under a minute. A flood of texts. Could we meet? Could we talk? Could we work this out between us before it went any further? Ms. Okafor and I had already discussed this possibility. She had told me to agree to a meeting if he asked, on neutral ground, with her informed in advance, with nothing signed or agreed to without her review. I texted back a time and a place. A coffee shop downtown. Public. Quiet enough to talk. He was already there when I arrived. Sitting at a corner table, coffee untouched in front of him, hands clasped. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was the same man. But something had gone out of him. The certainty. That steady, immovable confidence I had grown up measuring myself against. He stood when he saw me. I sat down without hugging him. He started talking immediately. Explanations. Context. Things I didn't know. His version of events, offered quickly. The way people talk when they're afraid that if they stop speaking, the other person will leave. I let him finish. When he was done, the coffee shop was quiet for a moment. Then I said calmly, without raising my voice, without any of the anger I had every right to feel. I'm not here to take something from you. I'm here to take back what was already mine. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it again. He understood. There was no negotiation available. There was no version of this conversation where I walked away. The documents existed. The lawyer existed. The 41 pages existed. He had run out of room. The court ruling came 6 weeks later. The trust was restored to its proper purpose. A full accounting of all funds was ordered. My father was removed as trustee, immediately and permanently. Restitution was required for what had been spent. Structured over time, documented, legally binding. He did not go to prison. That had never been my goal. I did not take his house. I did not destroy his life. I took back what my mother had left me. I made it official, legal, and undeniable. And I made sure it could never happen again. I didn't celebrate loudly when Ms. Okafor called with the ruling. I thanked her and sat quietly for a while in the good silence that comes after something long and hard is finally finished. My mother had planned carefully for me. She had thought ahead, during the worst period of her life, to make sure I would be okay. I had honored that finally. Late, but fully. I sent my father one last message that evening. Short. No anger. Just the truth. You should have just let me stay.